So picture the scenario. You are standing in your living room, and you ask the child in your life, whether, it's your own kid, a niece, a nephew, you ask them to please not jump on the couch.
Oh, boy. I
Yeah.
think we all know where this is going.
Right. So they freeze, they lock eyes with you, and they slowly climb onto the cushions, maintaining that unbroken eye contact, and they just deliberately start jumping.
Yeah, it is. It's a moment of just acute interpersonal friction that completely tests the limits of any caregiver's patience. I mean, it's infuriating.
It really is. And if you are listening to this right now, you're probably intimately familiar with the whole menu of reactions we typically cycle through.
Right.
Like, you might try the calm repetition approach, only to watch them slide off the couch and immediately start systematically emptying every single Tupperware container out of your kitchen cupboards.
Or you escalate.
Exactly. You escalate, your voice gets tighter and louder until you ultimately explode, which inevitably leads to an evening submerged in guilt.
Mm.
Or, maybe you just bypass the conflict entirely, let out a massive sigh, and look away because you are simply too exhausted to engage in a battle you feel like you lose every single time.
And that exhaustion is entirely justified. Constantly navigating childhood defiance is a really heavy cognitive load. But the research points to something completely counterintuitive regarding these recurring standoffs.
Right.
If you find yourself locked in the exact same power struggle day after day, it is not a signal that you need to enforce stricter boundaries. The data actually suggests that our fundamental instinct, like the reflex to double down on demands for compliance, is structurally flawed.
Yeah, and this brings us to what we're talking about today. I was reading this brilliant piece by Jen Lumelin in Psychology Today, and it's called The Surprising Science Behind Childhood Defiance. And it completely dismantles that instinct.
It really does.
So our mission for you in this deep dive is to completely reframe the mechanics of a child saying no. Instead of viewing defiance as like an operational glitch or a behavioral problem that needs to be systematically eradicated, we are going to look at the hidden neurodevelopmental communication happening beneath the surface.
And doing so really requires dismantling a deeply entrenched societal metric because we have been culturally conditioned to view immediate, unwavering compliance as the gold standard of effective parenting. Like it's the primary indicator of a good child.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we look closely at our underlying mental models, we often treat child rearing like programming a piece of software.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right. We input the command like put on your shoes or eat your broccoli, and the ideal successful output is a machine that perfectly executes those commands without throwing a single error message. We pathologize the error message.
We do. We label a child who pushes back as willful or difficult.
But we really need to question if a completely frictionless, perfectly compliant output is actually indicative of a healthy human being.
Yeah.
Like, is that what we actually want?
What's fascinating here is how the developmental psychology data aggressively pushes back against that perfect robot ideal. The Lumenlan article highlights a really profound observation from Dr. Alan Sroufe.
Oh, the developmental psychologist, right?
Exactly. He's a prominent developmental psychologist, and he states very plainly that automatic compliance is not the hallmark of a competent 2-year-old.
Wow. That fundamentally inverts how we typically measure success.
Yeah.
Because a 2-year-old who just automatically does whatever they are told without any pushback sounds like an absolute dream scenario for an overtaxed parent.
Well, for sure.
It offers a massive degree of operational convenience,
The convenience factor is undeniable for the adult managing the schedule. However, convenience for the caregiver and healthy neurological development for the child are frequently at odds. The longitudinal data cited in the research is actually quite sobering on this front. Achieving complete compliance is not the victory we think it is. Studies consistently demonstrate that highly compliant boys at age 5 are significantly more likely to develop struggles with anxiety, pervasive sadness, and fearfulness as they grow older.
Wait, real? So the children who never test limits, who seemingly always conform to adult expectations, are actually carrying a massive, invisible psychological burden.
Yes.
I imagine that stems from what it takes internally to constantly prioritize an external command over an internal need. Like, that has to take a toll.
Precisely. Consider the physiological and emotional mechanics required for a young child to be automatically compliant all the time.
Yeah.
It requires them to routinely suppress their own internal somatic signals.
Wow.
They have to silence their own desires, their emerging sense of boundaries, and their developing autonomy. They learn to basically hyperscan their environment.
Constantly monitoring the emotional state of the adults around them, right?
Exactly. To figure out what is expected so they can proactively avoid conflict.
So they're operating from a state of chronic hypervigilance. They aren't behaving out of a sense of relational safety. They are functioning out of a fear of disrupting the adult's equilibrium, which means they are essentially abandoning their own internal compass.
They are. And the long-term compounding effect of that abandonment is severe. If a child is never allowed to flex the muscle of saying no in the relatively low-stakes environment of their own home, they are denied the opportunity to learn how to safely advocate for their own boundaries.
It makes complete sense when you project that forward. I mean, if your developmental blueprint teaches you that asserting your own needs is dangerous, how are you supposed to negotiate a salary at 25? Like,
Exactly.
how do you establish healthy boundaries with a partner? You end up building an adult who is a chronic people pleaser, fundamentally alienated from their own agency.
That is the core danger of the perfectly compliant child. It masks underlying anxiety with convenient behavior.
So if robotic compliance is actually a massive developmental red flag, we need to completely reevaluate what it means when a child does push back. Because, I mean, knowing it's healthy doesn't make it any less infuriating when you are trying to get out the door at 7:30 in the morning.
Oh, absolutely not. But this brings us to the actual mechanics of defiance. We need to stop viewing limit testing as a personality defect or, like, a sign of disrespect. It is a literal developmental milestone. It is an evolutionary feature of a maturing prefrontal cortex, not a bug in the system.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the Lumelon piece brings in research by Dr. Grzina Kochanska, who studied how children process parental requests and how their strategies for noncompliance actually evolve.
Right. The resistance isn't static.
Yeah, matures alongside their brain. And I would assume this shift has less to do with simply learning new vocabulary and more to do with their executive functioning coming online.
That is the exact mechanism driving the change. Dr. Krochenska's work maps this evolution beautifully. She categorizes the early stages, often seen in toddlers, as phase 1 noncompliance.
Which is what, exactly?
It's characterized by raw, rudimentary resistance. It presents as passive noncompliance, where they simply filter you out and ignore the request, or it manifests as loud, direct defiance. This is the classic full-body meltdown, the screaming, the physical flailing.
Okay, yeah, that phase 1 response feels very driven by the amygdala.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pure fight-or-flight reaction to a perceived loss of control. The toddler isn't calculating a negotiation strategy. Their nervous system is just overwhelmed by the limit being imposed.
That is a perfect description of the neurological state. But as the prefrontal cortex develops and children transition into phase 2, typically around preschool or kindergarten, the data shows a distinct shift.
Okay.
The chaotic, emotionally flooded tantrums begin to decrease in frequency. They are replaced by simple refusals. The child delivers a flat, remarkably calm no without the theatrical drama. You also see the emergence of early negotiation tactics.
But the paradox here is that adults often find the calm no far more triggering than the meltdown.
They really do.
When a 5-year-old looks you in the eye and plainly refuses a request without any emotional dysregulation, we tend to view that as calculated disrespect. We treat it as a behavioral regression. But Kochanska's research suggests they've actually leveled up their cognitive abilities.
They have achieved a significant developmental leap. To deliver a calm, simple refusal, a child has to perform a complex sequence of cognitive tasks. They have to pause their reactive fight-or-flight response, formulate a clear boundary, and verbally articulate it.
So the underlying goal of the resistance has transformed. During a phase 1 meltdown, they were just blindly reacting against the caregiver's control. But in phase 2, delivering that flat no, they are actively asserting their own distinct identity.
Yes. They are demonstrating early theory of mind. They are recognizing, I am a separate individual from you, my internal desires conflict with your external demands, and I have the right to verbalize that divergence. They are essentially testing their competence and autonomy in real time. Learning to safely oppose authority figures is a critical component of healthy emotional architecture.
While the developmental psychology behind that is fascinating, I want to bridge this back to the reality of the listener. A calm, cognitively advanced no might indicate robust prefrontal cortex development, but the logistics of daily life remain.
Of course.
We still need them to consume nutrients. We still need them to put on weather-appropriate footwear. We still have to get them to school. How do we navigate this upgraded, sophisticated resistance without constantly resorting to authoritarian demands?
The practical application relies entirely on a foundational principle from the article. Behavior is communication. When a child is being defiant, we have to stop treating the defiance as the core problem. It is merely a symptom.
Right.
The stubbornness or the refusal is almost always a clumsy, poorly executed bid for a fundamental psychological need that is currently running a deficit.
So we are essentially treating a fever while ignoring the underlying infection. The article outlines 4 core psychological needs that drive a child's behavior: autonomy, connection, competence, and safety. If I'm understanding this correctly, when one of those pillars is compromised, the child doesn't possess the emotional vocabulary to say, I am experiencing a severe deficit in my personal agency today. Could we collaborate on a solution?
I mean, wouldn't that be nice? But no, they lack both vocabulary and the self-awareness to diagnose their own internal state. So instead of a diplomatic request for collaboration, their unmet need for autonomy manifests as screaming that they absolutely will not wear the blue shirt.
Yeah.
The strategy is infuriating to the adult, but once you decode the underlying deficit, the behavior is entirely logical.
Let's ground this theory in the case study shared in the Luminland article, because I think it perfectly illustrates the mechanics of this deficit. The article discusses a parent named Peju, who is trapped in this relentless nightly battle.
Right, the dinner table standoff.
Yes. Her daughter was exhibiting intense phase 2 defiance, absolutely refusing to eat dinner every single night, and aggressively resisting attending her Chinese class. It was a complete gridlock.
And from Paige's perspective, this resistance seemed entirely arbitrary. It felt like her daughter was just manufacturing conflict for the sake of being difficult.
But Peju decided to do a forensic audit of their entire daily routine. She documented every interaction from the moment her daughter woke up to the moment the dinner table battle commenced. And the resulting data revealed something staggering.
It really did.
Peju realized she was issuing a massive volume of micro-commands throughout the day. She was dictating what to wear, exactly what to eat for breakfast, how to sit, what toys to play with, and constantly issuing corrections to hurry up or slow down. And the crucial revelation was that the vast majority of these limits were entirely divorced from Peju's actual core parenting values. They were just reflexive, habitual micromanagement.
That is an incredibly common dynamic. Adults frequently default to micromanaging children's behavior because it provides us with an illusion of order and efficiency. But from the child's perspective, that constant barrage of microlimits is psychologically suffocating.
So what does this all mean for the dinner table conflict? Are we assuming that the refusal to eat dinner had nothing to do with the actual food being served?
The food was completely irrelevant. The daughter's behavior was a desperate, symptomatic response to a bankrupt autonomy account. Her fundamental need for personal agency had been systemically denied all day through those microcommands.
Wow.
By the time evening rolled around, her autonomy deficit was critical. The dinner table and the Chinese class were simply the only arenas left where she felt she could seize control and assert her own boundaries. Her defiance was her way of screaming, I exist and you do not control every aspect of my physical reality.
That makes the solution Peju implemented so elegant. She didn't try to find a better way to force her daughter to eat. She addressed the upstream deficit. Peju aggressively audited those unnecessary limits.
Yeah, she let a lot go.
She started allowing her daughter to choose her own breakfast. She let her dictate the timing of when she ate it. She gave her complete control over packing her own lunch. She essentially handed over the operational control for all the low-stakes decisions.
And the resulting behavioral shift is the most compelling piece of evidence for this approach. By proactively fulfilling the daughter's core need for autonomy earlier in the day, the intense resistance in the evening completely evaporated.
That's amazing.
The psychological tank was full. The daughter began eating dinner and attending her class without any friction.
It's like we are operating on an autonomy budget. If you bankrupt a child's autonomy early in the day by micromanaging how they hold their toothbrush and what socks they wear, they're going to default on the mortgage when it's time to sit down for dinner.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. Fostering autonomy is frequently misinterpreted as permissive parenting, but they are entirely different frameworks. It is not about abandoning rules or letting children dictate the structure of the household. It is about strategic auditing.
Right. You are looking at the vast array of commands you issue daily and ruthlessly eliminating the ones that don't serve a safety or deeply held value purpose.
Consider a child's tolerance for external control as a finite resource, much like a battery. Every single time you issue a directive, you deplete a fraction of that battery. If you drain it completely dry by the afternoon by micromanaging the minutia of their play or their mismatched clothing, they will have zero capacity left for compliance when it actually matters.
Right.
By intentionally providing autonomy where the stakes are low, allowing them to choose the mismatched clothes or the unconventional breakfast, you are preserving their battery. You are saving their capacity to comply for situations where safety or core values are on the line, like holding hands in a busy parking lot or attending an important educational class.
You're transitioning from a reactive posture of trying to crush defiance to a proactive posture of managing their psychological resources. You are structuring their environment so their fundamental needs are met, which eliminates the need for them to act out defensively just to feel like they have agency.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally alters your role in the dynamic. You won't always be able to instantly pinpoint exactly which need is running a deficit in the heat of the moment. Decoding behavior takes time, observation, and trial and error.
But the actual breakthrough isn't necessarily having the perfect answer right away. It's the mindset shift itself. So I want to connect this directly to you listening right now. Tomorrow, or perhaps an hour from now, when a child in your life pushes back, refuses a transition, or initiates that inevitable standoff over shoes, try to interrupt your default neurological script.
Don't just double down.
Exactly. Don't immediately reach for a firmer boundary or raised voice. Take a micropause and ask yourself the diagnostic questions Lumen Holland suggests. What is this behavior communicating? Are they attempting to assert their developing identity? Has their autonomy budget been bankrupted today? Are they utilizing a clumsy, frustrating strategy to fulfill a need for connection?
That pause is everything. It shifts your internal posture from combat to curiosity, moving from how do I control this child to how do I understand this child's internal state. Completely de-escalates the tension. It prevents you from getting hijacked by your own amygdala, allowing you to respond with your prefrontal cortex.
You stop viewing the child as an adversary trying to undermine your authority and start viewing them as a developing human struggling to articulate a deficit. But there is a final, incredibly provocative thought at the end of Lumen Holland's article that we need to touch on. She notes that engaging in this process, auditing your limits, and relinquishing control is notoriously difficult to execute.
Extremely difficult.
It is incredibly hard even for parents who know all the developmental science, who have read all the books, and who theoretically agree with every point we've made today.
Applying the science is vastly more complicated than understanding it because it requires navigating our own internal landscape.
Which raises the ultimate question. Why is it so viscerally physically difficult for us as adults to let go of that power? If the data clearly outlines how to dissolve defiance by meeting a child's need for autonomy, why does our instinct fight so fiercely to maintain rigid control?
This raises an important question about the true source of the conflict. When we are triggered by a child's lack of compliance, we are rarely reacting solely to the child's behavior.
We are reacting to our own emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
Perhaps the highest hurdle to peaceful interactions isn't the child's developmental stage or their clumsy communication strategies. The real hurdle is the adult's psychological reliance on control to feel secure.
Exactly.
We project our own anxieties, our own fears of being perceived as incompetent by other adults directly onto the child. We clamp down with arbitrary limits because we feel out of control internally, not because the child is actually engaging in harmful behavior.
We desire the predictable, automated, perfectly compliant robot because navigating the unpredictable, messy reality of an autonomous human requires immense emotional bandwidth. It demands that we regulate our own internal anxieties before we attempt to manage their external behavior.
We have to fix our own faulty warning systems first. So let's return to that opening scene. You ask them not to jump on the couch. They look you dead in the eye. They climb up. They jump. The next time that happens, try to realize that the unbroken eye contact isn't malice. It isn't a glitch in their programming or a calculated disrespect.
It's a mirror.
Yes, it is a mirror. They are testing the structural integrity of their relationship. They are asking, in the most primitive, developmentally appropriate way possible, if there is sufficient space in this dynamic for them to exist as a whole, separate, autonomous person. And how you choose to respond in that exact moment, whether you reflexively reach for control or intentionally reach for connection, writes the foundational code for how they will perceive their own worth and agency for the rest of their lives.